Winning new listeners is actually just the second step of the entire thing. It's more about actually just making the music. It was then in the early 90s, there were chances to release it, but it was not, because it was more like music made for DJs, so it got played in the clubs. So like half of my career, it was not so much about winning listeners, because the music was like club related. Speaking of the difference between the beginning and playing in front of 500,000 people invited by my own government, this is, yeah, beside it has been a long path. Yes, a lot of things has changed, and also especially how people adapt the music, you know, how it is like being released and how it's like also marketed in a way. And for me, it has been a long way. It felt like a long way. The differences nowadays are mainly that the young guys of nowadays are so much more skilled in advertising themselves than we were back in the days. It is always like harder to play for new crowds since they don't know your music. Like differently than when I go to France or Italy, where it's just full of fans, like real fans who know all the songs and just can't wait for me to come on stage. It is actually leaving your comfort zone to go to the US, you know, not New York or Montreal or like San Francisco. No, like real US, like playing inside there where this music is not very known. And so we have this also in other markets like Australia or UK, where everything is less, a little bit smaller than it is here in continental Europe. And this is maybe something what we try to do, try to close the gap between those different areas. Yeah, I played in Montreal on the Igloo Fest where I haven't played. It was the 10th anniversary for them, minus 20 degrees centigrade. That is almost zero on almost zero Fahrenheit. Yeah, quite cold, but quite nice. The benefits are mainly that I have a little music studio on stage, and whoever has mixed a song in the studio will know what I mean, can do with that song whatever I want in all its elements. So just do the math, like how much more complex that is to just a couple of files you mix into each other. And even though I was DJing as a young boy here in Berlin in the 90s, early 90s, very early I realized that's how I want to go on stage with my own music, played live exactly that way. I think this will lead to, or let's say, the growth of electronic music also over there will lead to that more and more people will get very interested in what are those guys actually doing behind their desk for the many bucks they're earning there. So the interest in the people will grow in who is actually doing what on stage. I cannot believe that DJs who really like play, and it happens, or even in front of big crowds, like pre-recorded sets, I don't think that will last very long for those respective artists. Because more and more people have this at home, produce their own songs. It's becoming like it's here in Europe, and here you cannot do this. I mean, maybe some of them are doing it, but it's not like on US EDM festivals where really just USB sticks get plugged, and that's that. So I maybe some artists will make it to maintain their success even with this kind of performing, but I think in general, I don't see that having any substance. EDM with these bass drops and then the champagne and then they go with the gummy boat to the crowds. I don't want to criticize it so much because when I look at it, it's often very young crowds. And I doubt that it's so much different from what I did when I was 15, going here to Berlin's bunker in the fog and the stroboscope and finding this completely crazy with techno music, with, I think, 150 BPM plus. And yeah, young people raging from time to time in big crowds. So that's why I don't want to criticize that too much. And yes, it lifts the ceiling also for other electronic music artists who would have not made it. So it also has to do with like what you are used to here, and if like every even clothing stores run music what has four to the floor rhythms in it, then yes, that makes it more normal that this kind of music will also have success in the US. Well, I think it will like coexist, like it's happening all the time. Like even now at EDM times and big electronic artists also in Europe, there is like it was 20 years ago, like small labels who perform on the perform and release on the smallest possible platform, and that music when it's ready for radio and airplay becomes a little bit more watered down. That is, I think, a normal process. I have signed a 3+2 contract. I think it's 12 years. That's so much to will I work with them again. Um, it was very nice to have access granted to this archive, even though now some time has passed and I see many professional studios and whoever there's around, like also like scanning all archives for old songs who could be somehow being pressed into a dance track. Therefore, even though I was like really looking forward to go to this archive again, I will not do it again since everyone is doing it now. So it was a very nice experience, but especially vocal wise, I realized this already when I was producing Seven, I will rather go a step back than another step forward into that vocal direction. It's very important for me when you have worked like 1.5 or 2 years on an album like that to not go to the studio for a very long time in the direct aftermath. So I finished maybe 10 months ago and I wasn't back to the studio since then. And that's very important not to go because of the next album. You know, when you then not have been in the studio for 2 years, what then happens in the first 3 weeks of arriving back to the studio is actually, though, is in my world, deciding for how good or bad your following album will be. Just because how happy you are to be back and like realize that just by getting older and you haven't been there, but your skills are better, or that did not degrade. You know, they're just the best how they ever have been, and even better because you got older. What I'm doing at the moment is touring, and I started in Mexico and Canada and the US, and now the tour from the album. I had the luxury to not have to tour right after its release, since my daughter was born. But we do it now in January and February, so it's like quite tight. Many shows per week all over Europe, and yeah, that's actually, you know, you just go there on stage, play your 3 hour concert, and you get the immediate response from so many people. That's quite different than sitting for 2 years in a studio getting no response at all. So we call it Erntezeit, harvest time, and yeah, touring.